people that we don't know and lots of people that we know. This is amazing. And I just put in the chat, so if you're not familiar with the way how we work, we use the chat a lot for instructions. And so I just posted in the chat that this is our ninth virtual facilitation practice, which is amazing. We started on the pandemic, March 2020. We started doing this gatherings because people were like wanted to share and to learn together and also to mingle together. And so when we keep doing it, because it's so nice to have this safe space and to be together, connect and learn. So we're gonna have 90 minutes together here, and we always have special guests with us. And today it's a very, very special guest that Fernando's gonna introduce in a while. And just be aware of the alerts you may have and like emails, phones, and if you can just be more present and be aware of all these alerts will be good. And just create a space for you to take notes, digital or pen and paper sometimes is good. And let's use the chat as much as we can. Over to you, Fernando.
Yeah, lovely. One more gathering full of people from all over the place. Thank you, David, for bringing this crowd to be with you. So we are just like catching the wave that you're creating with all your work. So as this is a gathering to also connect, we'll be having a talking triad. So we'll be in small groups, in groups of 3 people, to just talk briefly for 6 minutes why we are here and what we expect. I'll just put in the chat this orientation for you. And it's also a way to really land in the meeting. So let me double check if we have the rooms ready. Yes, we have. So 6 minutes, enjoy your colleagues, and then we'll start with David in a few minutes. See you in a bit.
This in education.
Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, I think we're all back. So we are here to listen to stories and origins of group graphic keyboard. So not be in between you and David. David, it's impossible to like present you to the crowd. You have a very big bio. Too much work you have been doing. So please take it over and guide us.
Okay. Let me just start by saying a few things here. I'm in my studio in Petaluma and have been here since 2016. Lived in San Francisco since 1969. And I will share a little bit as we get into this about, where I grew up, which some of you have seen that video, the short video that was connected. So you know a little bit about that. So I was getting ready for this and I looked back and I found an old Prezi that I had created when I launched Visual Meetings in 2009. Wiley and Sons asked me to write this book on how you do visualization with groups, because I've been doing it since 1972 with a leadership organization called the Coro Foundation. And I was blown away when I looked at this Prezi, because I haven't been using Prezi for a while. I don't know, do any of you use Prezi?
Oh, yeah.
They've really souped it up a little bit, and it's really nice. So I tuned up the presentation, and it's got, in some ways, it's kind of like a historical retrospective, and will really tell the story of this field. So I'm going to share my screen, and any of you who get a little bit dizzy, can just put on your seatbelts visually. We will go, I am going to go somewhat speedily through this because this is a flyover. This is a big picture, this first 20 minutes of what is this field and why is it so effective and what's going on. So can you see, these are the two pieces. I'm going to do the visual facilitation overview and take you up to the keyboard. We're going to have a break, and then I'm going to come back, and the second half is going to be like a jazz improvisation on the keyboard. So I am going to work on a tablet and be very intuitive. So let me get started here. This is the presentation as a whole thing. Yep, it started, let me get out of here and start from the beginning. Okay. There we go. So there's the book, if you haven't seen it. This turned out to be a huge bestseller and was the first of 4 books from Wiley. I've seen some of you nodding. But on the cover, there's a graphic. And the graphic is talking about what the powers are of this way of working that has now gone global. I was really struck at this time how if you go to Germany, people are drawing all over everything. It's kind of incredible. So here in Denmark, Ole Kvist Sorensen has bigger picture, and he was doing it. And then way over here in Indonesia, Tool and some others are busy applying graphics all over Southeast Asia. So what is it that's going on here? Matthias Whitebrecht, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago, do any of you know, started Visual Facilitators in Hamburg. And he and I were at the UViz conference in 2017, and we thought, how can we think about this field? And what we realized, and I'm going to shift here if I can get to it. There's a little annotation capability here as a highlighter. You see, this is the... Okay. We decided to illustrate this field and chose an archipelago metaphor. An archipelago is a bunch of islands. It's like the Philippines and a lot of ocean. And so right now we felt that this field has a whole bunch of people who are in facilitation, but it's also got a whole island around people who are providing the technology for all this. Like somebody, you know, there's a whole company called Prezi back there. And around this island, you have the graphic facilitators who, which is what I mostly did, standing in front of the room and running the meeting while drawing, doing both at the same time. But many people are doing graphic recording in the front or graphic recording on the side as part of this visual practice. But you also then have visual consulting, design thinking, strategy mapping, explainer videos. All of this stuff is going on in this same context and uses a lot of the same language and technique. And up here in the ocean, if any of you know Kelvie Bird's work, I had her swimming like the dolphins up here, the generative scribing. And then people, of course, are moving into storytelling and story mapping. The people who are buying these services are all the islands around. So what we did in this conference, I don't know whether any of you were there, but the whole sky here, which I've added later, the sky was blank. And I basically facilitated the whole group talking about this and answering the question, what really is going on in this field? And Matthias then took notes all over in the sky. So it was really a fantastic session, and we kept the map. So this is a Prezi version of what's on the cover of Visual Meetings, and it talks about the 4 powers of this. And for those of you who work in Prezi or in Mural or anything online, one of the problems is getting an overview of the graphic, because there's so much detail, you can get lost in a blizzard of sticky notes or stuff like that. So basically, when you work visually in an interactive way, the way visual practitioners do, you're going to spark people's imagination. They're going to be engaged. They're going to have big picture thinking. And the enactment happens. And I've got my marks all over this. Let me see how I can erase that. Eraser. There we go. So let's dive in and look at these one at a time. This is the picture on the front of the book. This imagination business is where it all started for me. I realized that this is a kind of a retrospective. And I have always been a bit of a mystic and very involved with my imagination. So this is an example of soul collage, if any of you are familiar with that methodology. You basically go through and pick out images and then answer these questions. You kind of have dialogue with the picture. I am the one who, my name is, what I need from you, my gift to you is, what I have to say to you is, and my shadow is. So I, on this day, pulled together this collage, and this is what I wrote about myself. So this in some ways is an introduction. I am the one who sits and sings the new light into being. I need your patience and your surrender. The forces of darkness gather, and lightning strikes fires. My gift to you is the dream of old ways and new blending in a symphony of appreciation for life. I know you carry the energy of the coyote and the glide of the owl, and can flow into water through obstacles and despair, listening to the mother. Listen to the ancient ones and know that your shadow is ignorance. So that's the kind of mentality that I bring to this work. And I think what's going on inside your inner awareness is a huge part of this whole business, because when you're working with people directly, there's transmission, and there's lots of things that happen that aren't on that chart. But the actual process of drawing on the wall has a dynamic that from the beginning results in high engagement. When people talk, I listen, I visualize, they see, look at all these pieces and how many different versions of interpretations of things. So people are just, their brains are going crazy. What's going on here? Does what he wrote down match what I heard? Do I want to add? Do I want to correct? The person themselves feeling acknowledged. It basically just stirs things up from the very moment you mark the page. I'm seeing some nods out here. This dynamic has driven my work, basically, this little picture right there. But it also supports big picture thinking. There is really no substitute for wrapping a room with people's own ideas. And that's what I'm going to share about in the graphic keyboard. And finally, they have a document they can trust and walk out of the room. And it really supports enacting and following through on what you're doing. So those are the 4 powers that have been there from the beginning. And so part of it is, if you're in this business, imagining what you're bringing when you're working with a client. So here are some examples of how actively it engages people. This is what I did for years. For 2 years, I was a recorder behind Michael Doyle, who facilitated. He was with Interaction Associates. And I did nothing but draw on the wall as a recorder on the side. And because they didn't have digital cameras, I hand copied all these charts after the meeting. And boy, did I really learn what I was doing and not doing as I went through this. But you can also give the paper to the participants. Here I'm over in China, and I had 3 different groups tell stories of their consultancy experience. And we're in a drizzly conference center right up near the Great Wall of China. And here, this one of my colleagues, Tommy Nagai, working on a template. Simple graphic templates turn out to be part of this work. Then dot voting. Dot voting in person requires everybody getting up from their chair, milling around, just looking at all the information, deciding on where to put it, and noticing where everybody else is putting it. And so how do you bring people's awareness of the relational element of an organization? Well, this is one way. Add sticky notes on templates, and you get a whole system that breakout groups and large conferences can handle. And now we're working online. So here's a meeting just recently from my company, The Grove, using Mural to look at how we get materials to our workshops. So here's a meeting that mixed everything all together. It was a real visioning kind of session. So I did graphic recording. There's a whole sticky note wall, PowerPoint, and we had several people in remote locations, and they were using tablets and sharing graphics. So this whole thing that went on to come up with a sustainability strategy for a software company just went all over the map with the graphics. Now, I said that big picture thinking is one of the real advantages of this, and I just want to give you a little example of what I mean. Any of you seen this map? This is a blue and red analysis by county, not by state. And you see a very different thing when you look at a map that's done one way versus another way. But my parents took me on a journey when I was a child. And we started here in Bishop, where I was raised. And we went all the way across the little blue roads, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and ended up in Maine. I was 8 years old. Now, if you're 8 years old and you do something like that in a little trailer, I have an indelible internal scan in my experience of this country. Then they decided to go all the way up to Banff, Canada and back on another one. So I got to go up to Canada for the first time. And then when I was 12, I got to take a train all the way to the Boy Scout Jamboree, then down to Chattanooga, around and back there with a whole bunch of Boy Scouts. So this map is not the same map as it is for you. This map is, and that's true for every word we speak. Let me see if I can get my eraser here. And one of the real things you need to understand about working visually is words, and the words people say and the pictures you draw all have this experiential backbone that is invisible to you, but is bringing richness and problems and everything else. Okay. Here is what the Grove's main meeting room in the Presidio looked like. Now, this is a simulation in Second Life. And you'll see up here a series of graphic templates and a series of mental models and a final vision. You also see on the table there are worksheets and on the laptops. So the system we've created of templates for doing big picture thinking is meant to be a Lego block kind of system that you can assemble in many, many different ways to create a panorama. but I wanted you to just feel what the panorama feels like. Panoramic thinking is a type of thinking where you're really stretched out. Now, it's just not the same online. You can simulate it with Mural, but I think there's still going to be room for this kind of jamming. So, what do you have to work with here? We have created guides for starting a meeting, and one of the most popular is this river raft thing. And basically, one of my clients asked me, he was from Bristol. He says, give me the simplest toolbox for facilitators. And I just found myself intuitively blurting out, well, the number one is to know where they're going. What's the outcome? Two, you've got to get everybody in the same boat, which is the agenda. I'm using this metaphorically. And secondly, you want to be able to control yourself on the river, which is always very dynamic, by being clear about your role and being clear about the rules. And of course, this spells OARS, OARRS, which is a memory device so that people don't have to have notebooks all the time. Well, the OARS ends up being one of the most viral templates that we use. Once we use it in an organization, they tend to standardize on it. And here I am working with the Park Service and having it filled out. And believe me, a meeting that starts with those 4 questions answered is a lot more productive than almost any you can imagine. It's just a kind of a go-to best practice. So I'm not going to go over all these different templates, but we basically have a bunch to look at what your current state is, a bunch to look at your future state, and a bunch to look at the action state you're going to take to get from there, here to there. And this is kind of the simplest kind of strategy thinking you can have is current state, future state, strategy for getting there, and the environment you're going through. So once we get through with all that, we have this great advantage of having a big picture. And we've done a lot of really big picture work with clients. This one was the first 24-foot graphic in 1990 for National Semiconductor. And they wanted to upscale their vision. They were one of the original semiconductor companies. And so we went through bunches of versions and got this story that any of their executives could stand in front of and tell the entire story. But it follows a template. And the template is the journey vision template, which says basically know where you're going, know where you're coming from, and how you're going to get there. And we used this single template to drive 16 different re-engineering processes in National Semiconductor in the early 90s. We would do the vision and then write the agreements here on this chart. So this became a summary chart rather than one that we just facilitated with all the time. You can get all these at growtoolsinc.com.
Woohoo!
So the enactment part is having a document that people really care about. So here, the Exploratorium moved from the Palace of Legion and Honor to the Piers in San Francisco. I don't know whether you're familiar with that, but this is the leader of the Exploratorium standing in front of the vision they created, talking about why it's so important to do this. And the process we did helped align them. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of people who have to all get straight why they're doing this very messy thing, which is taking them through a total crucible of uncertainty until they got there. Here, Otis Spunkmeyer is a cookie company you may or may not have heard of, but the CEO, John Schiavo, really liked this way of working and had me develop a vision for the whole company with his top team. So the vision part's on the right of this drawing he's standing in front of, their strategies in the middle, and the history is illustrated over on the left. He is standing in front of this and orienting, I think, the IT group to why it's important for them to do their business planning in the context of this larger vision for the company. And so he had every single function leader be able to explain this vision to their people. And we had a special workshop just to teach them how to use a chart to explain something. So that ended up being a terrific example of enactment. Here was a West Coast Green Conference, sustainability conference, and we set up an action hub where anybody could come in here and have their idea visualized by us and then post it in the conference. So we actually did roadmaps for people and stuff in the context of the conference. Here we did a 6-location virtual meeting with a company that was working all over Asia, and they were trying to recruit more Asian managers. And each one of those 6 had this set up. Everybody was on a computer and also could see what I was drawing. And I was the only person sitting in San Francisco listening to their presentations and drawing pictures on a tablet, which would then show up for everybody. And then they would respond to all the questions from their leader here. That was kind of an amazing meeting. It required a lot of tech support. And we ended up organizing a network of hundreds of nonprofits in the upper Midwest called the REAMP Network. It's called Renewable Energy Alignment Mapping Network. And this guy standing up here, Rick Reed, had the idea that if foundations and nonprofits work together, they might make more progress on the environment. And so their motto was think systemically and act collaboratively. And basically our graphics were the way to get them to think systemically. And this is a roadmap for all the things we did the first year. All the circles on this chart are real meetings that we held with this network. And we had them feeding their reports and their work group strategies into a whole system. This, then we had a website for the project. It is still going on. It has about 150 nonprofits in 8 states, and it's got 25 foundations, and they have been hugely effective. But part of it is, how do you organize people who really aren't in one organization? Well, they've got to hold the same picture in their mind of what they're doing. And so the problem of getting everybody to hold the same idea in their mind of what they're doing is to draw. Because drawing is brain interface, according to Paul Sappho. Okay, let's go. So now I want to zoom in on the story of how I got here a little bit, and then we'll take a break. How are we doing on time?
We are doing good. Maybe 1-2 minutes more, and then we go for small groups for digestion.
Okay, so this will go somewhat quickly. This is me back in the early 70s, but this is where I grew up in Bishop, California. And that little video told you a little bit about what that does to your consciousness if every day you're looking at this kind of stuff. So I'm still looking at that kind of stuff only in Mapland. And here I'm doing the history of the gap at the time of the downturn in 2008 and 9. Remember the Great Recession? They were kicking butt because they're a value provider. You know, you get things a lot less expensive with them. So this was a bunch of vice presidents. I hadn't heard the story before, had a timeline. I put in their profitability as a line. I did that ahead of time. And I did some sticky notes of their major products. But basically, they told this story, and then we summarized themes. Rachel Smith, who worked for us for a while, did this map of how it all started, and I'm not going to dwell on it, but there were a whole bunch of us up here at the headwaters of this thing. This is completely discounting architects and engineers who've been working this way forever, including Leonardo, et cetera. But for people doing graphics with business, myself, Jeff Ball, Fred Lakin, Bob Horn, these people were at the headwaters, but also Nancy Margulis was in St. Louis doing a completely separate thing. And she fit in, and Christina Hooper Woolsey down at Apple was doing all kinds of study in multimedia and interactive video and stuff. So if this were an accurate map, there'd be many, many, many more tributaries. And now it's an Amazon River of interest. And you know, the headwaters are little tiny creeks up there, often not really understood. What's emerged is an understanding of the archetypes. And I've been studying jazz piano for quite a while. I love metaphors. And what jazz does is it makes distinctions that are really clean between the different chords. And once you learn those distinctions, you can then begin making up all kinds of things endlessly. So the keyboard starts with the simplest thing you can do, which is to have a poster. And then a list where you can just flow in a very uncomplicated list of things. Then you begin to cluster and activate. Oh, what happened here? Why didn't it go? Huh. Well, you know, this may be a signal that we should not continue with this keyboard. I'll do it with the other part.
Okay.
Basically, you go to a cluster, then you go to a grid, and then you start diagramming, and then whatever. And so I am going to walk you through this in quite a bit of detail after our break.
Yeah, this break, actually, it's a time to reflect on what we heard so far and what we saw. And so what stood out for you and insights and questions you may have. So you're going to be in small groups to digest a little bit of what we heard and seen. See you in 6 minutes.
Thank you.
Yeah, just exploded.
I don't
It's
know where
your fault. You're to blame.
there we are.
Okay, Carolina, everybody's back and smiling.
We had no
Moving.
choice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's how it goes.
So please write in the chat your questions, ideas, comments, whatever you want to share. And we are going to have like 5 minutes to maybe answer 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, lots of Brazilians here. Love it.
Muito bem, muito bem.
Muito bom.
I'm from mainland Portugal, so for us it's fine.
Oh, bem. Okay.
I just want to draw everybody's attention to Lara's post out there in the chat. What if cave paintings were just notes from a prehistoric meeting?
I love that idea.
That is so fun.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
David, what tablet are you using these days for your online meetings, virtual meetings?
I'm using a Wacom One tablet, and it is right to the right hand of my laptop.
Cool.
And this way, I'm working with my right hand on the tablet, and I'm looking at gallery view and see all your faces. So I found that setup is really helpful.
Yeah.
When I'm making a video, I have another studio that I work with, but this works well. I just got a new ring light, which is working pretty well. It's just a disc.
Yeah. You look like you're 40, you know? That light makes you look like you're 40, David.
Oh, don't I wish? I turned 80 in May. So part of my interest is in showing that you just don't have to stop having fun and being creative just because you've got a lot of experience. In fact, it's a big asset to have a lot of experience if you're not attached to things and not attached to knowing what you're doing, which I have a lot of history in not being attached. Because if you stand in front of a group and display your listening, believe me, they're going to see where your slip is showing and where your shadow is showing. They're going to see everything. So you better get comfortable with not knowing.
David, another question that I put in the chat was, you described your shadow as ignorance. And I was just curious about that.
Well, I'm a little bit ignorant about how important the non-visible world is in directing people's lives, because I get really caught up in what I see and what I think and what I write and what all this tangible stuff. So for me to believe that prayer is really a generative factor in dealing with our current crises, I do, but my ignorance is not fully understanding just how powerful that aspect is. So that's kind of what's coming into more focus. It is ignorant to believe in samsara, the illusion. And we're, with graphics, our whole job is to create the illusion, to amplify the illusion. So if you get caught in that, in believing that this illusion you're creating is really it, that's ignorance. Are you ready for another little jam session on the keyboard?
Yeah, let's do it.
So this is on a different setup. I'm using Sketchbook Pro, which was created by Autodesk and is now free for everybody. And people complain a little bit that it's slightly buggy, but it works really smoothly and is simple. So I've got a little sheet here because I want to tell you how this all started for real, how the group graphics keyboard came to be. I had a friend named Jack Saloma who came out to write a book on the consciousness puzzle in the Bay Area. I don't know whether you're familiar with how much was going on in the 70s, but there was a lot going on. And down at Stanford, people were doing all kinds of remote viewing work. Target Putoff were working on, can you actually move a needle by thinking about it? People were working with paint, Curly, and photography. It was, the quantum physicists were having a great time over in Berkeley. And he told me, he says, the only guy I found, he's writing a book on this. He says, the only guy I found who has any theory is this guy, Arthur Young. And he explains it all with graphics. You better get over there. And so in 1975, I went to a seminar in Berkeley with Arthur Young, and he at a blackboard told this story I'm going to tell you and laid out the foundations for what I've been doing since. He said, all of science has been trying to figure out how everything is integrated. And we know that there's a whole world of three-dimensional real stuff that we've been able to analyze and make a lot of progress on. And this world of molecular reality, when it was discovered and described, really set off a whole enlightenment. And it accelerated when they discovered that these molecules actually are composed of atoms. But the thing that scientists are not so clear about is that they didn't ever see the atoms. They calculated the atoms, and that they're only really, they don't stay put. They can give off and take on electrons unpredictably. But of course, science pushed on and discovered that there were particles. They called them particles when I studied physics in high school. They're now called forces, fundamental forces. And what these are in a bubble changer under magnets, some go this way, some go this way. And they're only really constrained by the direction they go, the intensity. So a fundamental force doesn't have width and length. And finally, this is all based on light, which is photons. Now, we know on the other side that some of these molecules figured out DNA. which is and they figured out how to grow as plants. And some of those chain molecules, polymers or chain molecules like DNA, developed arms and legs and became animals. And it's interesting that at a structural level, the protein is the molecule with arms and legs, and it can aggregate together. And finally, humans, because of their big neurological system, and some animals, learn how to imagine the past, imagine the future, and through the processing of light, regain freedom. So that was his story. Light takes on one constraint as a force, 2 as an atom, 3 as a molecule, regains 1 degree of freedom as a plant, which is unpredictable in its growth, movement in the animal world, and finally, self-awareness. And he says, I'm going to symbolize these graphically. This level is symbolized by a point, this one by a line, this one by an angle, and this one by a tetrahedron. So basically, this arc of process of starting with total freedom and going to total constraint and rediscovering freedom through mastery of constraints is a process which is universal in the world. I want you to take something you know and tell me what you see through this construct. So I took graphics. And in 1976, it was like a total explosion of understanding. I basically made a shift from thinking about graphics as an artifact to thinking about graphics as a process. And so I began asking myself, there are 2 processes. One is the process of doing the graphic, and the second is the process of perceiving the graphic. So I began thinking about it as process, and I realized the simplest possible process would be to just make a point. Let me go get the right pen here. Got to get on the right thing. There we go, to make a point. The next simplest process is to make a line. The next simplest process is to get off the line and look back and analyze it. The next simplest process is to actually organize those lines in a regular way. Now, he said that the 4th one was a tetrahedron because you actually turn it into a physical object. But I was in Mapland, so Mapland isn't 3D. So the simulation of the tetrahedron is the box. The next one, which is branching, is putting those first 2 together. And then introducing dynamics to this. And finally, you get back to unity. So I came up with the seed shapes. Was my first exercise in applying the arc of process. Basically, point, line, angle, box, hollow arrow, projects, dynamic reality. So, how did that get there? Let me go back and walk you through this. The first thing that I saw was that there is a relationship between this process at the simplest level of drawing and the process of displaying on a wall at the macro level. You've heard that saying, as above, so below, that these processes actually exist throughout all layers of whatever you want to look at, this going into constraint and out of constraint. So posters are the simplest kind of thing, and I'll show you how this works. Do you notice this coming on the screen? Well, it's got color, it's at an angle, and it's different than everything else. So that's the way you make a poster. Then here's a list. Here's a cluster. Here's the grid. And you begin to get 7 of these that all echo the simplest steps of the process. Now, this whole way along, what I'm doing is I'm thinking not only of his degrees of constraint, but I'm thinking also about the metaphors that are embedded in here. The metaphor of the photon, the metaphor of the atom, the metaphor of the molecule, the metaphor of the plant, the metaphor of the animal, and what's true of those phenomenon that could be echoed in graphics. So let's take a look at a little more systematic way. Figured out that not only did we came up with names for these 7, but we gave a set of words that describe the power of that particular format. So the power of a single image is to focus your attention, just to grab your attention. That's all it does. The power of a list is to energize the flow. Clusters activate comparison, because if you see the 2 people here looking at this, if you put sticky notes on a chart, people are going to compare them. Grids build combinations, diagrams grow understanding, drawings animate meaning, mandalas show unity. Now I'm going to take these one at a time and improvise a little bit with them. So what makes a poster a poster? The key thing here is you are going to differentiate, which means the eye will be attracted to something that's completely different. So just to give you a visceral sense of this, that part of the drawing is completely different than anything else I'm doing. And I would guess attracts your eye. So what is it saying? Well, in some ways, it's this graphic that I'm doing right here suggests the photon with all of its unbelievable energy. And I don't know whether you're familiar with physics, but what physicists say is that a photon is a little bit of potential that's spinning, and it's spinning so fast. Yeah, have any of you got on one of those spinners and then pulled your arms in and you start going faster? Well, the photon has completely pulled its arms in, and it is like an unbelievable bundle of energy. So if any of you ever had a new idea that just ignited you, it was like, you know, a light hit your candle or something. At the level of postering or single imagery, you have complete freedom to do almost anything you want if you're different from everything else that you're looking at. The next is a list. So listing is you're basically lining up the data. So a person talks and you write. Person talks and you write. Person talks and you write, and they say some more, and then you write. And the fact that you're writing is you're basically taking your energy and you're just moving it in a flow. And any of you who do graphic recording in a list like that, there's no structure. You don't have to worry about it. You can just go. And so what's happening interactively is people are getting little reinforcements every time they say something. Every time they say something, oh, I was heard. Oh, I was heard. Oh, they saw me. Oh, witness. Oh, his whole body shook when he wrote that down. Oh, he's looking back at me with a big surprise on his face. Oh, I mean, you can dance along that flow because you're not having to worry about the graphics. This is like pure energy. However, you might want to get people to start thinking. So at the point you want to get people to start thinking, you might decide, let me get on the right thing here. Okay. I'm going to make some little sticky notes here. And I'm going to fill them up with yellow so they look like sticky notes. And I'm going to call this one fire. And I'm going to call this one earth. And I'm going to call this one water. I'm going to call this one air. I wonder what happens when you put water on the earth. Or does air affect water? Or the water puts out fire? You see what starts to happen when you just put something around like that? What order should these be in? You know, it's, maybe water is underneath air. Oh, maybe the air is up in the air. Maybe I ought to fill in that background with more white. So clusters activate awareness by juxtaposition. So they activate because there are no connections. And again, it's the interaction of the viewer with the chart that is the activation. That's the process that's going on. You with me so far? Am I going too fast? Okay, I got to hurry up here, or I'll make Fernando and too nervous. The grid is where you now are putting yourself in a conceptual prison. You are now boxing yourself in to try to be completely certain about things. And this is sort of like what molecules are doing. And you have to cross categories to have the grid work. The grid doesn't really tell you anything if you don't know what this category is in this category and this category and this category. So I'm going to draw a little picture here. What do you think that's a picture of? Well, clearly this is low, high, amount of money you're making. And this is low, high, no, this is low, high time, and this is money, and this is success according to a materialistic world that maps everything that way. If you're working like I work, you think of it as flipped upside down. So grids are really great in that it forces you into crossing different distinctions. And it's the reason they're used for spreadsheets and budgets and all that kind of thing. But let's say you want to break out of this prison and really get some more dynamism back in. A diagram is a branching system. And again, now I'm thinking metaphorically. The mind map is sort of a typical one you would know, is you put the idea kind of at the center. Here's a big idea, here's a big idea. So I'd say, okay, inspire. Here's some things, the way it inspires, visions, internal. Then I'd say engage. Then I say big picture. And basically, I can create something like this. Somebody sent me recently a picture of a brain. There's a software called The Brain where you can do this mind mapping into thousands of things. And what this does when you branch things like that is there's no end to how much you can start to grow your understanding. So that's what you do with diagrams. But the big breakthrough for me was understanding what happens when you actually analogize. You point to an analogy. That's what makes a drawing work. So I'm going to take my little branching thing. And now it's not just a diagram. What is it?
It's a tree.
Now it's a tree. And to the extent people know, they put into it what they know. And that process brings it all to life. It basically animates it in ways that the drawing itself never can. Now, we do have animation, which is not the same, but when the viewer animates through knowing what you're pointing at, that's the dynamic that's really exciting. And finally, the mandala. And the mandala is where you decide everything is going to go at one central, all organized around a central thing. And it turns out that you can have a matrix in a mandala. You can have clusters on a mandala. You can get lists in the mandala. Many of the different mental models for how the brain works are done in this circular form, because what you're doing is you're centering everything. And so intellectually, the process is you're constantly going in and out of what's the organizing principle here that makes this a whole and parts. So you're basically getting whole and parts in one drawing. Now, since I came up with this in 1976, that basically has held up as a set of 7 primaries. But what I realized after working with this a long time, that these 7 archetypal formats are also 7 different types of thinking. Can you focus? Can you flow? Can you analyze? Can you contain? Can you maintain discipline? Can you grow? Can you jam on the piano of your mind? And can you see the whole thing as unified, connected, and part of a living earth that I like to call Gaia? Can you hold that while you're playing around with those graphics? I've spoken.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, so we're gonna have another time together, different people. You're gonna meet different people to talk about what caught your attention, insights, comments, questions. So 6 minutes for that. Enjoy. I got caught with this, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. to be, you know, Gaia.
I need to hop off, but that was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. I was thinking of like the flow of the river, and you know, like or you can be like as firm as a rock, or you know, like and use those elements and that energy in the graphic facilitation. I was like, yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I woke up many years after I started doing this, realizing what I'm really doing is dancing. Everybody's paying attention to the chart, but I'm moving my body. I am miming. I am, you know, somatically responding to people. And because that's not what they're really paying conscious attention to, I can do a lot on that channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that. And it's interesting because here in Canada, people used to say, oh, the way how you move your body is different. And so the way how I facilitate, and you know, like, so all of that.
No, you have an advantage. You're from Brazil.
And David, do you, when you facilitate and you fill the room, do you consciously bring the movement or the energy that is missing or needed in the room? Do you do this consciously?
I play with people. Yeah, I do whatever gets the energy moving. And you know, it's a dance. It's working on all four of those levels, and I never know when it's going to be stuck or not stuck. But basically, I'm functioning as a juggler, kind of a sacred fool for the group. You know, the sacred clown is a classic archetype. And so, you know, I'm working for the kings and crown princes and the queens and all these people, you know, are trying to run things, and the lowly serfs and the people who are undervalued, and, you know, the slaves and all. I mean, the whole thing is there. And so here I am supposedly to help them. Well,
sometimes
I never know what's
people
going to
need to
get it
hear.
going, but I really like to start fires of interest in good ideas.
Yeah, and usually if you are saying something that is not the status quo, or something that, you know, like you can be the four, you know, then you can show different perspectives, and then people can get different ideas, right?
Well, it's a lot like composing music, because I might want to start with, you know, very respectful and not scary. And let's use our minds, think it through, order it all out. And what I know is that if I do that long enough, it's going to just create chaos, because nobody's got an image in their mind as big as a whole room full of information. Nobody's thinking that big. And so I watch the whole thing start to compost right in front of me. And then now people are in a lot of uncertainty. Oh my God, look at all this. We did say all those things. They're all here in our heads. Now what do we do? And so we like to train people in facilitation to say that the game is not right, wrong. It's what next. Is what got created and what's the next move? What's the power and the promise in this situation now that we've put all this up on the wall? And so that's a hard thing to teach, is, you know, how do you come up with what the next move is? How does a jazz musician decide what to play? I mean, you sort of look back on your own experience and say, oh, you know, there's a melody on that last beat. I'll try that one. I'll bring this theme in from some other place. Or sometimes I get thrown into confusion and just bring people right along with me and let everybody be confused for a while. But it's really tempting to think that your job is to organize it for people and get it all clear. And well, sometimes it is. Sometimes that's what people want is clarity. But I'm more interested in people connecting with the deeper vector of their lives. What do they really want to be doing? What's their longing? What's pulling them? And that's true for an organization. I think organizations have a soul, and that soul is heading somewhere. And so can we connect with that and support it for a period of time?
Yeah, more and more I see like in the organizations that if you don't go there, you don't go anywhere. Or, you know, like you fake it and kind of that you have something or have a goal, or but you have to go inside, and then the connection among humans and be human and be, yeah.
So busyness is a great distraction. I mean, it keeps us from looking at everything that's killing us. Let's
And
just
you are showing, David,
yeah.
you're not doing this movement, you're doing this movement. So that's
Yeah. Is that your boat, Jim?
That's my aspirational 80-foot catamaran. Yes, it is. This is what I can sail it. I just don't own it, but I can sail it. That's my retirement plan, David. That's when you and I do these projects all throughout the Mediterranean, and then we go do some work in the Bahamas, the French West Indies. That's my aspirational boat.
Yeah, so please, if you have a question, write in the chat, or if you want to ask verbally, you raise your hand on the React. And
By
then
the way, I will answer the chat questions and send my written responses to Fernando and Carolina, and they'll send them to you. The ones we don't get answered.
Yeah, so please write in the chat your questions that David's going to answer after. And Stuart, what is your question?
Hello. Yeah, I was chatting to a few people in the rooms in different groups, and I think that there's a lot to be said for this virtual way of working, which you've been doing and explored for many years. And I guess the question is, you know, you've mentioned, I love the fact that you're talking about nature. And for me, it's all around creating those connections. I've seen over time, people seem to be a little bit obsessed with technology. And I think sometimes we forget about the human connection. Have you got any ways in which you can encourage your people to focus more on the human connection than technology?
Well, here's an example of the kind of thing I'm thinking about. We do a lot of Zoom, particularly all during the pandemic. So we always do check-ins at the start to try to connect to our humanness. Like Carolina led us through a little meditation. So I discovered with a group of about 8 or 9 people, if you say, all right, let's do check-ins, and one person start, and then when they're finished, they pick the next person. Now, you wouldn't think that's much of a shift, but that little shift requires that everybody pay attention to everybody else and who's talked, and am I going to get picked or not? And you don't know. And then you get picked, and then you pick somebody else. It really stirs things up and invites people to focus on them as people. Or what Gisela likes to do is say, oh, how wonderful to see all of you. Why don't we all just get in gallery view and just drink in all those wonderful faces and just look at each person and, you know, notice how they're touching you when you look at their face. How are you feeling about, you know, looking at Laura in Vancouver and Beth in Canada and Jess in Mexico? How do you feel when you see, you can penetrate the screen. It's possible to jump through the screen, but you have to think about doing it.
Any other question, or I don't know if you...
I'll ask a question. How often have you got people drawing or making visuals online, like using Mural or Miro or whatever? Is that something you encourage a lot, if especially people haven't had a lot of experience doing it, or does the technology kind of like slow things down and get in the way? Just curious what your take is on that.
I don't have a lot of experiences with multiple people drawing, but have imagined doing that many times. And part of it is people have very different setups. And it's actually takes a bit of work to disappear technology. I mean, I spent a couple of hours yesterday simply double checking all the hookups for this. That would Prezi actually show over Zoom? Or would there be a big latency that made it kind of obnoxious? How about Sketchbook Pro? Is that going to, what happens if it crashes on me as it does sometimes? You know, how am I going to recover? So that's gotten in the way of groups doing it. However, Mural has pretty good draw functions. I'm not so familiar with Miro, but we encourage people to go over and get pictures from the internet and put them on the Mural. And people can draw, and you can encourage people to do that. So I would say go for it.
Yeah, I'm just so the time just flies so quick. So we have 1 minute, and I would like to ask you to write in the chat what was valuable for today's gathering. And so please, if you can put in the chat, and then we can just say thank you for David so much for this amazing 90 minutes together, this gathering. So please, if you can
Well,
say
let
to
me
us.
end with one invitation. If you go to the Grove, which is thegrove.com, there is on the tab my name at the top, the founder of it. And if you click on that, that gives you access to what I'm working on right now, because I've retired from doing visual meetings, not because I can't draw, but because I can't hear. You know, my hearing has really gotten bad, and you can't be standing up in front of people writing everything down if you can't hear the right words. So that doesn't keep me from doing workshops and things like this. But on that website with David Sibbet, you will see there's also a link to my blog, and I have a lot of interesting writing in that blog, which has not seen the light of day, about how I think and move through life. And I'm going to be doing a lot more. I'm working on 2 books now that I'm really excited about. One of them's a novel, and one of them is on leading sustainable organizations.
Ooh,
You know, what are the choices for how you organize, and which forms of organization have a chance of sustaining themselves? So I'd love to interact with any of you, and that's the way to do it.
Hey, David, I'm wondering if the Grove, or if somebody would be interested in crafting sort of a community of practice. You know, this group of 30 or 40 folks who are all clearly passionate and interested in this work. I wonder if that, you know, informally, can we form this COP, and, you know, maybe just quarterly or monthly, however, whatever moves us all, just to do this again, not necessarily always with you, because we know you're busy and your time is critical, but it's been such a blessing to meet and look and read about all these folks who are doing so many interesting things. I just throw that out there. I don't know if that's something the Grove wants to do. I'd be interested in helping to spearhead something like that, just so that we can meet casually. Yeah.
We did organize a global learning and exchange network called the Glen, and we support it with the Kajabi website connected to our website. And because it takes a lot of administrative time to keep up something like that, I have pulled back from overdoing it, and we have a stewardship circle that's in charge. And things are cooking, but I'm thinking about offering some new things through that. And I'm also willing to extend an offer to you, Fernando and Carolina. I'll come back anytime you want. I've got a lot of different things that would be fun. So you go ahead and reach out, and yeah, I like what you're talking about, Jim. Although we're spending more time right now working on communities of practice around how you handle change. And how do you deal with uncertainty, and how do you train leaders to deal with uncertainty? So that's where Gisela and I are focusing hugely at the moment. There are so many people doing graphic facilitation. The Grove does not need to do that.
Yeah, that's right.
As our outreach activity. I mean, people still call up and we arrange for jobs and things, but we're concerned about the level of change that everybody's going to have to face. And how are people going to deal with all of this adaptation that's going to be required? I mean, you know, one of our staff was in Asheville, North Carolina, and he still hasn't gotten home yet. And fortunately, his house is kind of high, but here's North Carolina in the hills. Who would think that they're completely wiped out by floods? That's almost biblical. And so this kind of level of stuff's happening more and more. So we got to be on our toes. I think there's going to be a lot of call for the work we do.
Yeah, we need more facilitation than ever.
I am not, I don't have to get off. If any of you want to chat a little more, I'm willing to answer more questions if you want. It's up to you, Fernando.
Yeah, maybe we can officially close the session and officially open the after party.
So yeah, if you need to go, thank you for coming. But if you can stay a little bit longer, it's good to have a little bit more of David here with us. Lots of beautiful messages for you in the chat, David.
Oh,
yeah, a lot of inspirations. I don't know if I had the chance to read it, but we can send to you after and with the questions.
Well, I think I can save them, can't I?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
How do I do that? Let's see. Format.
You go in the three dots, the up right in the chat. There's three dots, save chat.
Open, close. Save chat.
Yeah.
Okay, we are now saved.
David, I'd love to hear more about the hybrid meeting. You actually showed an example where you had some people online and some people doing it in the room together. And that always is really tricky. So I'd love to hear if you have any insights on how to make that work, especially with the visual, like pulling that all together. Thanks.
Well, having templates really helps, because here are some things you can do. One, you can make sure that the people who are remote show up on a gallery view that's big for the people who are in the meeting room. So if you get a big TV or projected or whatever, so that, you know, the size of the imagery of the people who are remote is equal to the people in the room. That's one thing you can do. The second thing is you've got to make sure the audio really works for everybody. So you have to mic your in-person meeting well. And audio is probably the most important thing to get right on any kind of virtual work. Then comes the problem of who gets to see the group. Do you only see the group as a whole conglomerate group? If everybody brings their own laptop and turns their audio off, you can have everybody on one of the chiclets. And it sort of start feeling like a regular Zoom meeting, except for there's a group who are actually meeting together. Now, on the charts, of course, you can have one of the, tech host for the live meeting share screen and have a camera on the chart so that people who are remote get to see the chart being created. And again, you have to set it up so that your cameras, do that correctly, but that's totally technically possible. One thought I've had would be having a secretary reproducing the charts in front in Mural, and then everybody could kind of look at that and then fuss with it, so that you begin getting a link between the front of the room and the mural board. But the thing that makes it work is for having people get used to whatever platform and whatever system you end up setting up, so that they aren't having to struggle over that. You want to disappear the technology. So we ended up doing a year-long strategy session with Cal Poly completely on Zoom. Everything was done on Zoom. And we would pull these templates into Mural, and we had people work collectively to learn how to put sticky notes on there, and they weren't into drawing, but they successfully went from being their extension college, which they were online courses and stuff like that, to becoming an actual college. So now the College of Global and Professional Education as the 5th college at the Cal Poly Pomona campus, all online. I know it's really surprising because I went to they had a big celebration of this and invited Gisela and I down there. And this one woman who was a real live wire and kind of a key to a lot of things happening, I'd never seen her except on Zoom. And she's really short. And on Zoom, she looked really big. And I'm really short, so I pay attention to that kind of thing. But there is something that we don't get when we're on Zoom. I mean, I think that the hybrid this makes sense is, if you're with a group of people who are going to have to work together, figure out how to get together to really get to know each other, and then you can work better on Zoom. In 1998, the OD Network Conference had one of the first computer conferences called Collaborate 98. And I was the keynoter on this virtual conference. And this is almost in the time of C-prompt. This was not Zoom. This is a real computer conference, typing only. So I put an essay online and then agreed to check in 3 times a day for a week and answer all of the responses. So we had about 160 people who waded in and commented on what I said and everything. And so the essay had 3 hypotheses about this world. One of them was that there are going to be a lot fewer face-to-face meetings, but they're going to be even more important. So facilitation ends up remaining really important. Even more important because people have fewer of these kinds of meetings. The next one was that even though there are tons of choices for technology, you have to pick one and master it to really get people working together. I mean, is it going to be Zoom? Or I don't know how many of you have worked on Microsoft Teams. It's totally different experience to be on Microsoft Teams than on Zoom. And now there are more platforms coming out that are realizing how there's Circle and there's a bunch of things that are making it more and more interesting to be on virtual work. But you still have the problem of getting people to agree on it and mastering whatever technology they use. Like the co-drawing, everybody would have to figure out their tablet setup and all that kind of stuff. So the third one was that if people are getting a lot less information over this virtual channel than they do in person, you're going to have even more developed meta languages. A meta language is a framework for thinking. So if any of you are familiar with the team performance model, the strategic visioning model, the group graphics keyboard, these are all meta frames. They're like the lenses on it that a photographer uses. They focus on certain things that you've built into the framework. Well, once you've got some of those kinds of languages distributed in a system, people can have much more robust conversations. So part of the way of getting people to be able to work remotely and virtually is, do you really know how to use roadmaps and checking on roadmaps when you're in the implementation stage? Do you really understand what the pluses and minuses of brainstorming are, and different ways that you can do brainstorming? I mean, there are people who are learning to do soul collage online, where you play with imagery and have very deep conversations that are very different than drawing line pictures. So I think we're in a world right now where we don't have answers to the hybrid question. I mean, most organizations are confused about this. But some of those ideas I just shared is some of the things I've been thinking about. I'd love to have a studio totally optimized for hybrid, but it's a little beyond my expense account at the moment. I went through a whole phase in the 90s of all these electronic keyboards, smart boards. I still think there's room for really amazing smart board conferences. But I have not been working with a smart board recently.
Go on, Dave.
Dave.
Yeah, David, wouldn't you think, just to that point, wouldn't you think some enterprising, large or small organization would want to collaborate with you on getting to the place you just described, which is away from the confusion and the disagreement and the learning curves that nobody wants to do? I mean, shouldn't somebody embrace you with resources to make it happen?
I would love that to happen. And in fact, I'm trying to figure out how to shift my identity from being a graphic facilitator to being an unbelievably adept process designer.
Well,
I can design the processes at all four of those levels: the physical, the informational, the energetic.
Right. And imagine, David, connecting what you just said to some level of really important purpose, right?
Yeah.
So some kind of purpose that we really need that's eluded us, and have your wisdom and your unbelievable intelligence.
Well, if you know of somebody I should talk to,
well,
I'm really needing to find work as a process designer and a coach to people who are trying to do stuff that's important. I'm done my leading thing.
Yeah.
I want to be hired brains and fingers for people who are really up to cool stuff. But I need to find those people so that they know somebody like me exists. I mean, people don't really.
Yeah, it's an awareness.
I'm having trouble to accept the fact that I exist. With 80 years of experience, you wouldn't believe the amount of experience I've had.
Yeah.
And I am, when it comes to creative ideation, I'm sort of in a category of my own around the kind of thinking I can do.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to do, Dave, is.
Well, don't you think we should take it? We should all try to imagine plugging that in, plugging where you are and who you are, which we now know, which we didn't really know before, plugging you in to some place where you can really be unbelievably David.
Yeah, and if you have a socket, let me know.
Well, I'm going to be thinking about socket all day. I won't be able to do any work today because I'll be thinking sockets. Thank you.
Art metaphor is wonderful.
They are. They are.
That's quite a pile of books you got back there, Abby.
Actually, videos. I love movies, David,
Videos. Wow.
and I have quite a collection. How are you?
I'm
It's
good.
so nice to see you such a long time since the last time we worked together. I found this last night and I couldn't stop until I reached the answer that I was accepted. Thank you so very much. You just can imagine how wonderful the tools that you gave me has been in my work these days.
Oh,
I am an event organization. I have this company that organize and design events, and being able to actually make people see what they want and how to reach that goal is wonderful. I don't like technology in this area. I'm the old school facilitator and graphic recorder. And you remember how I love that. So being here, it has been a real pleasure, David. Really. Quiet experience. And I hope you will be again in our screens. And
thank
you
you.
know, just reaching you has been wonderful, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, David is doing a series of presentations, right, David? And I have been in a few of them, and we need to promote them more. I'll let people know in our network about the next events coming from the Grove. It's
Oh,
been
please,
amazing. Yeah.
One thing that would be
please.
fun is to take you into Second Life and to have a whole program just on Second Life. Even though even though it's not very popular, I still got both my islands.
Can we see you again, David? Could that be a possibility?
Well, I've talked to Fernando and Carolina about this channel. If you every Friday morning we have a cafe in the Glen, and the Glen is glencommunity.org. And if you want to be added to that mailing list, you just register. It's free. But
wonderful.
12 or 15 of us gather in the cafe every Friday morning, and they're also cooking up other programs. And I'm probably going to offer some programs through them because that's kind of our R&D area.
Okay, wonderful. Can you repeat that for me?
Glencommunity.org, GLEN community.org.
It's in the chat. If you open the chat, you can just click there and go to the.
Oh, great,
page,
Carolina.
yeah.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate
And
that.
we're also sending these links with email after. So
yeah, there you
get it.
Wonderful. I'll be waiting for that. I promise.
Yeah, just yeah. So thank you for your time, your knowledge, and all what you share with us, David. And yeah, maybe we have something to do further.
Thank you.
Oh, please.
Thank you for being
Please,
host.
Yeah, to
that
be
would be
continued.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you
so
very
much, David.
Experience.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
See you
Have
soon.
a wonderful day.
You too,
Bye.
buddy.